met some really good friends now at your place. And it's really fun that clientele base.
Yeah.
So you asked me a little bit about the history,
right,
of Panamint Springs in specific, and it's really tied into the history of Death Valley at large. So we, like you said at the beginning, we sit on Highway 190. That's really actually very crucial to the formation of Panamint Springs Resort. So our name, Panamint Springs, implies that there are springs here. And if this were 1926, that would be true. But in 1936, those springs dried up. This is a very tectonically active area. We have lots and lots of little earthquakes every day. Usually that means that we don't have big earthquakes. But that's the uplift of these mountains.
Right.
Is that doesn't happen without little earthquakes. But usually it's a lot of little earthquakes. This year we had a couple of big ones that made national news down in Trona and Ridgecrest that did some damage to those towns. We were fine. We lost a couple of bottles of iced tea. They actually had some significant damage though to the communities to the south of us. But sometime in 36, the springs, something shifted in the ground and the springs stopped upwelling here. And but I'm going to step back a little bit further. In 1926, there was a gentleman by the name of Bob Eichbaum, and the mining in Death Valley was it wasn't winding completely down yet, but it was really starting to wind down.
And what did they mine for in this area? Gold?
They mined for everything. There's gold, silver, copper, lead, tungsten. There are radioactive isotopes in some areas. There's so much.
And they're still mining in this area.
They're still mining in this area.
And the reason I know that is the last time I was to Ballarat to visit my buddy Rocky, there were about 6 trailers, and these were guys who worked in the mines and lived in these trailers.
Yeah, they were probably working down at Briggs, which
Okay.
is a gold mine, and it was active up until a few years ago, when they basically spent the main vein that they were working on, and shuttered the operation. However, the rights to that mine have been purchased by another gentleman that's doing some experimental processes to reprocess the already processed ore using bacteria. Not really sure the ins and outs of that detail, that process, but it's a new process. So they're going back through what they already know what the gold content is. It's already ground up. They just need to reprocess it, and hopefully this bacterial process will pay off for them.
Well, that's how the gold mining towns and the gold mining industry. I mean, the gold's still here. The gold didn't go away, but it's okay. If you can get this for it, how much does it cost to extract it? And if one is higher than the other, then they go for it.
Yep.
You still see the weekend dry panners who go through the old tailings.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll spend a whole weekend, and they'll go camping, they'll drink beer, and at the end of the day, they'll have $40 in gold. And
there is a lot of BLM land adjacent to the park where that is totally legitimate.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the mining is actually on BLM land, and that's partly why it's still on BLM land, is because there's still viability in those mines. They're looking at, here in Panamint Valley, they're looking at mining lithium, and I've got some mixed feelings about that. Lithium is obviously increasingly important to run our smartphones and our devices.
Yeah, only things that need a battery. That's all we need them for.
But lithium mining is also very disruptive to the natural look of things. I don't know if you've ever seen a lithium mine, but they have these giant pools that are all kinds of crazy technicolors.
Yeah.
And so we'll see if that happens. Right now, the BLM did give a permit for exploration. We'll see if that actually goes into production.
Well, some of the old gold mines too. I mean, they used cyanide. To extract the gold from the ore. So that wasn't good. And they had the big cyanide pools that the birds would get into. Now, I'm sure they
Not-
don't do that anymore, but I'm talking about back in the day. Or do they still do that?
That's still a viable option, but they do it a little bit differently now. So they now grind up the ore and lay out either cyanide or arsenic. I think it's the cyanide in like big rainbird type sprinklers.
Okay.
And then there's a giant liner underneath the ore pile that collects the cyanide that's attached to the gold, and then there's a rather simple process where they remove the cyanide then from the gold using charcoal or using charcoal, so or some kind of carbon. So.
And that's why people live out here, because it's people find a way to make a buck and they go where that opportunity is. So let's segue into your family.
So let me step back to Eichbaum.
Okay, sure.
So the mining was starting to like roll up because all the really rich stuff had been the easily processed stuff. You mentioned, it's a matter of the logistics of what it takes to get that product out of the ground, out of the ore, into market. So all the really good stuff had been taken. Now, all of the minerals that we just talked about were not the big payday for Death Valley. It was actually the borax. Or the borax.
Mm-hmm.
That was the real pay dirt from Death Valley. The 20 Mule team is still an active brand that you can buy in the grocery store.
It is.
That was deployed here.
Don't they refine it in Trona?
They do refine some of it in Trona, but the Harmony Borax is now part of Rio Tinto, and their main borax work is down in the town of Boron.
Okay.
But so as that shifted to boron and mining started to shift away from Death Valley, people started to think about tourism of Death Valley. And Bob Eichbaum built Stovepipe Wells. And he and 6 guys built a toll road from the town of Darwin, which is now pretty much a ghost town, although there are still active households up there, to the present-day location of Stovepipe Wells. We're talking about 50 miles. Those guys built a toll road. Now, it was a dirt toll road in 6 months.
Wow.
And that came right through the property here.
How many miles?
It's about 50 miles.
Wow.
That's just an amazing feat. It probably wasn't a terribly great road, but it came right through the property. The Reeds that were here were miners, and they had several mining interests around, and they were here because there was water. So it was Bill Reed and Agnes Cody Reed. Agnes Cody Reed was one of the nieces of Buffalo Bill Cody. Her and her sister came out overland across the country to Death Valley for the mining boom that was going on here. And they initially worked here servicing miners' clothing. So darning their socks, patching their trousers, etc. And then she met Bill, and they got married, and she was here. And then Eichbaum put his road right through the property. I'm sure they were happy to have him do that.
Sure.
And then Agnes basically ran the motel. They built the motel and the restaurant, and Agnes ran it. Bill died a few years later. I want to say 38 or 39. But Agnes was out here until the late 60s.
Wow.
Running the resort. Now, some family came in and helped her out. But when she finally passed on, her estate held the property. And various people would come out and try and run it until her niece bought it from her estate. And they had like a construction interest in like Jackson, California, over in the other gold country, the actual gold country of California. And he would fly. They put in the airstrip out back. We have a little dirt airstrip for small planes.
Okay.
And he would fly clients here to basically entertain them. Mm-hmm. They'd shoot guns and hang out in the desert. It was
do guy desert stuff.
Yeah, and in those days it was a lot more. It was not as there were a lot fewer people here in Panamint Valley, which is why Charles Manson used Panamint Valley as his like hideaway. He'd get his drug shipments down there on the playa, and then they distribute it into LA and around from with cars. But that's why Manson was here in the south part of the valley, is because it was so remote that. And it took the FBI knew he was here, and it took them quite some time to find him, because it's hard. I mean, it's a big area, and it's hard to find something. If you're looking for something, it's hard to find them. And those operations were actually based here in Panamint Springs. They were coordinated here. But so that's kind of the gist of what happened. Then. The Ninnises tried to sell, that's Agnes Cody Reed's niece and her husband, tried to sell the property. The
heirs, I guess, after she passed.
Yeah.
Okay.
They tried to sell the property to this public defense lawyer and his sister, but tragedy struck them shortly after they took over. The brother-in-law died, and the sister lost interest. Jerry ended up getting a divorce, and he ended up running the place by himself for about 12 years until we bought the place. And he did some really good work, but he had a really hard time of it because he was just one person, and he had a lot of health issues. So, but he did bring it back from being boarded up. And
when was this? So
he got it, I want to say, in '89.
Okay.
No, that can't be right. Because we bought it in '06, and he'd been here about 12 years. So my numbers are wrong there. But
well, it sounds like that's when I started coming out here. Me and my buddy California Dave from Los Angeles. We came out here, and it was probably 1990, maybe a little earlier than that.
Yeah.
And we came in. We wanted to get a room, and the rooms were full. There were a bunch of bikers here, drinking beer and flipping nickels, and basically we asked if we could have a room. They said, "Nah, sorry, we're full." I said, "Well, then what are you going to do?" They said, "Well, I guess we'll go sleep up in the mountains." They said, "There's shady characters up there. You probably don't want to go up there. Tell you what, you buy a couple beers, you can spend the night at what used to be and will soon be our campground." And so we drank a couple beers. The Harley guys invited us to, I still remember this because they said, "Come on and pitch quarters with us." And me or my buddy Dave, we're not gamblers. And they said, "Well, you don't have to pitch quarters. You can just watch the gals bend over and pick up the nickels. That's the most fun of pitching quarters and pitching nickels out here." And they were your typical Harley gals, so all right. I'll just leave that alone. Yeah. But that was our first experience of this place. And at that time he had a bunch of German beers. And then your standard stuff. But it was a nice bar. It was a nice bar, and I guess that's why the Harley guys like to stop. Yep.
And they still like to stop here. There's really good riding, both on highway and off highway riding. It's a wonderful area to be on a Harley or on a dual sport.
You get a lot of KTMs out here this week.
Oh yeah. And those are fun bikes out here. There's a lot of the Jeep roads make great bike trails too. So there's a lot of Jeep roads, that go out to old mining camps, to old ghost towns.
We did that one time, and we went to an old lead mine that was only accessible by foot, burro, and the Jeep that you rent down in Furnace Creek. There was a Jeep guy there who would sell
Farabee.
Yeah. And we rented one from him.
Yep.
And it was a bunch of money, but man, I'll tell you what, that son of a gun went every place we needed it to go. And he told us, look, if you wreck or get stalled or dump it upside down, he gave us a GPS. You hit that button, we'll come and get you.
Yep.
So he sold us on it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's got a pretty good operation.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of adventure to be had. I mean, every single one of these canyons has something really cool, whether it's, a natural feature like Darwin Falls, or if it's like Lookout City, an old mining town. It's there's so much history and so much natural beauty here. You can spend a lifetime exploring. It's so huge.
So when did you say your family picked this up in 06?
06.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did that